Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to Energy Speaks Back, powered by B2B Energy. My name is Paul Webb, and I'm the founder of B2B Energy, and I'm your host. And weekly, I present to you energy experts from around the world. Welcome to episode 160. Our purpose, as always, is to provide a good understanding of energy management knowledge from around the world, which is available today for us to deliver savings that impact on our planet. Welcome, energy enthusiasts, to another enlightening episode of Energy Speaks Back, where we delve into our guests' origin and their knowledge in the industry. Please engage with comments and the poll after this episode. Today, I interview an infrastructure attorney from the US who's focusing on the EV charging networks and the risk and rewards around implementation. Our guest today provides valuable insights into this ever-changing and ever-evolving industry. We need to take a step back and listen to his story. So without any further ado, let's dive into the EV infrastructure world with Jason Goldfarb. Good afternoon and good evening, Jason. How are you today?
Thank you. Good. Excellent. Excited to be here.
I'm saying good afternoon because it's your afternoon, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, just about 12 o'clock here.
Brilliant. And it's just past 5 o'clock here in the UK, and we've got the dark evenings already of winter. Hence, no one can see this, so they can hear it, but I've now started wearing a hoodie to do my interviews because it's cold.
Okay.
What's the temperature like where you are now?
50s, but you know what? Over the last couple of days and weeks, it's actually been unseasonably warm.
Really?
I'm in New York, but it's been really, really warm. We're in that stage where we don't know if we should have the heat on or the AC on,
right,
or nothing going, and like every day it's something different.
Right. Do you know, I've been to New York 3 times. The first time I went, you had a freak snowstorm. And then the last time I went, you had a freak cold weather. It was minus 13 degrees.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And yeah, it was very, very cold.
Yeah.
But you know, the only way to see New York is when it's really like Christmassy feeling, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Do you actually
Best
live
time
in
of year here.
New York?
No, I live in the suburbs, so I live in Long Island.
Right,
An easy commute into Midtown Manhattan, though.
right. And is that with a train commute, is it,
Yeah,
or you drive?
yeah, yeah. Long
Nice.
Island Railroad. You could drive, but I don't know why you would want to.
No, no, no.
It's a hellish drive, but on the train, it's totally fine.
I can imagine. I can
Yeah.
imagine. So, Jason, we've met. Obviously, I tracked you down through LinkedIn, and I see some
Yes.
comments, and then I read your profile about EV and the legal side, and I thought I need to interview that guy. And I've been
Thank you.
badgering you for a couple of weeks to come
Yes.
on, and I thought we was ready to go, and we wasn't, but we're here now. So,
Yes, we're
thank you
here
very
now.
much
My pleasure.
for making the time for us today. So, I've learned a lot about you over the last couple of conversations we've had. So, for the benefit of our audience, can you please tell
hmm
us about yourself, your background story, and your origin story?
Yeah, so I got my start really in the world of infrastructure, really in the telecom industry about 20 years ago when I went to work for an infrastructure investment company. Back then, the only infrastructure investments that they were really interested in or that were even out there and available were really telecom assets. So the company was purchasing leases, license agreements for cell phone towers, rooftop installations, and so on and so forth. Um, the world of real estate infrastructure has really grown quite a bit since then because solar energy has started to become big. There's been wind power, there's now battery storage, outdoor advertising, data centers, and now, of course, electric vehicle charging. And I decided about a year ago when I started to kind of like shift the focus of my practice a little bit because I saw that the world of EV infrastructure was really not being serviced from a legal perspective. And what really, really made me think about this, I think I may have told you this cute little story, but I was at a conference and I met the only other attorneys in the room besides me. And when I asked them like how they were handling this for their real estate clients that were considering deploying the infrastructure or being approached to put the infrastructure on their properties, like how they were dealing with it. And they gave me just a blank stare. and then said, well, like, what do you mean? So I knew then that I was onto something. Um, so in terms of the way that that I started marketing myself, I've been marketing a lot in that direction. I'm still very much firmly rooted in the regular types of infrastructure. So for example, I recently completed a transaction for a client that was selling a cell site on top of a building that they owned in an urban neighborhood. I worked with another client doing a 6 megawatt community solar project where they were installing equipment on top of a massive warehouse facility. Work with a client purchasing land out in the Midwest for use of a data center. But in the world of EVs and in terms of putting the infrastructure down, it's very similar to all those other different types of infrastructure assets. You still have to do things like doing your due diligence. You have to see who your parties are. You have to make sure that you're entering into the contracts with the right people, that you actually have the legal ability, despite the contractual ability, but the legal ability to put your charging equipment down in a place where you think it makes sense for it to go. You want to make sure you're putting it on the right property or not on the wrong property,
Yeah.
or that you're not dropping it down where somebody else might have an easement. You want to make sure that even though there's um, practical access to the property where you're putting the equipment, that you actually have legal access to the property. And sometimes that's not the same thing.
Yeah.
You can be putting equipment down somewhere where it's landlocked. So things like that. So, I originally came at this because we had a lot of clients in the real estate world that were looking into deploying or possibly deploying or being asked to deploy this infrastructure on their property. But my practice has kind of morphed a little bit in the sense that I'm not only working with real estate people, but so for example, I'm working with a startup that's trying to build out a nationwide network. Another company that's got a very unique type of urban charging equipment, and they're working on their first deployments. Another company that's looking to manufacture EV chargers, out in the Midwest. So it's kind of like grown, even though I started out, and it focused really on the world of real estate. But that's really how I got to where I am right now.
There's loads of things buzzing around in my head now.
It's a lot of stuff.
What do you go as far as the cabling, the connections, the final connections?
Hmm.
Does that all come under your remit? Because that can be
So
quite complex as well, couldn't it? With
yeah, it can be. So it doesn't necessarily come into my world. It comes in a couple of different ways, but very for me mostly tangentially. So um, I like to say I know enough to be dangerous when it comes to this stuff, and so I do, and so I do see that. So for
yeah,
example, if you have somebody that's looking to put in let's say level 3 charging, which is fast charging. Fast charging equipment is tends to be heavy. It's very expensive. Has
yeah,
massive power requirements. You can't just put it somewhere.
no,
Besides all the other things that I mentioned to you from a legal perspective, there are a lot of practical issues that go with that. And to your point, is there power? Is there a nearby power station or substation? How are we dealing with the cabling? Where are the lines being run? Where are they going? By the way, that gets you into easements and non-exclusive easements and where the stuff goes and whose property it's crossing. Again, that brings in, the whole, all of the legal stuff that comes with it. But for those things, that stuff does come up. Zoning and permitting frequently does come up.
yeah,
The way that you're doing your engineering drawings or even your surveys, where you would depict exactly where everything is located. I don't know how they do it in the UK, but here we do surveys. You do a land survey,
yeah,
and it's kind of like looking at the property from 500 feet and just seeing everything mapped out in terms of where it is, where the neighboring property is, where the streets are, where the
yeah,
property lines are, where everything is going. So you have to look at that stuff and be able to figure those things out. But most of the times, certainly in most of the infrastructure work that I've done, the companies that are doing the site acquisition work or that are doing the actual construction work, they will work with somebody that's doing that. In other words, they're arranging to get the permits, they're arranging to get the interconnects going with the power companies. So when somebody embarks on a project like this, there are a couple of different pieces. That's why there are even companies out there that will project manage all of this because there's so many
Yeah.
parts of it. One of the parts is where's all the power coming from? Who is the local power company that we need to get in touch with? What kind of arrangements do we need to make with them? What do we do if there isn't enough power? Maybe your thoughts of putting in a level 3 charger in that place go poof because
Yeah.
there's no power. You can't do it.
Mm.
So maybe you have to go to do a different type of charging setup. You do level 2s, or maybe that's not the right location and you find somewhere else to go. So that stuff definitely comes up, and it is definitely a major concern. I have people reaching out to me all the time saying, "How do we speed up that process?"
Yeah.
And other than trying to work with an expediter or with a construction company that is super familiar with that entire process, or even hiring somebody whose specialty is zoning and permitting, because that's a niche even beyond the stuff that I frequently will deal with. That can sometimes help, but even I know when people who work with companies or with attorneys that do that stuff, it still takes time.
Yeah.
That's one of those things I'm sort of hoping that right now, like now that thankfully the election is over here in the US, and I think there's going to be more interest in people, making investments and taking some of the risks to get involved in some of this stuff, that's going to be one of the things that they're going to try and speed up on a local level.
Yeah.
You know, uh, Working with the power companies, doing the zoning, doing the permitting, so that work is fast tracked.
And I think people like yourself providing the principles of how to do this and the
Mm-hmm.
stepping stones, it's always going to have that legal surrounding, but at least you can
Correct.
give them the stepping stones and the process to follow. And I think that's what it needs, isn't it? It needs
Yes.
a proven process that can, like a flow chart as such, like if this is a roadblock, this is what you do here, and this is how
Mm-hmm.
you continue. I can see you just unraveled loads of things in my mind regarding the issues surrounding this because
Right.
us as I'm an energy manager consulting, and I will say to a client, oh, maybe we should get some, or have you considered getting EVs? That's as far as I would go. But then the next
Mm-hmm.
levels, you know, you're right. And the first thing I was thinking about the access, how people can, because you're going to have to provide access for not just the people in the building, but it's
Mm-hmm.
external people, who's going to be
Correct.
using, who are the clients as such. The variables are significant, aren't they?
Yeah, they are definitely. So I can give you, two examples of just to give you two examples of access. So back when I was working on telecom investments, so a deal came across my desk where there was a piece of property out in I want to call it an area it was mostly farmland, and there was a cell phone tower kind of like back off the road, and we were being asked to purchase the compound, excuse me, all the way at the back. But once we got title, give me a second, I just need a quick drink. Once title came in and we took a look at a survey, we discovered that there was another property in the front, and all you had was an easement going from the front property to the back property, but it wasn't recorded. It was just mentioned in the lease agreement with the telecom company all the way in the back. And the owner of the other property was not willing to grant a separate. In other words, so that easement was only attached to the lease agreement for that spot in the back. Once that lease agreement went away, it was no longer access. So even though you could get in a car and you could drive across the other person's property to get to the back, there was no way for us as an investor in that property to ensure that we would have that access, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that you do typically with these agreements is that we take in other words, I'm getting a little technical here, but essentially what you're doing is you're taking the agreement and you're assigning it over to somebody else. But we're also getting an interest in the property, which is an easement that gives us access. The
Mhm.
problem was that easement was only as good for as long as the lease existed. So even if we were to, let's say, I'm making something up, but let's say there was only 10 years left on the agreement, but we took a 50-year agreement for it. We once the agreement would go away, there would no longer, that access just wouldn't be there anymore. And so the owner in the front wasn't willing to grant it. So unfortunately, that was something we had ended up having to walk away from because no one had recorded anything. There was nothing there previously. It wasn't enshrined. It was only in the agreement itself and only temporary for as long as the lease existed. And then that was the end of that. The other example that I would give you is when I first started to get into this, somebody had reached out to me because they, I don't know if it was them directly or they had heard about the story. They wanted to get my take on it. So an EV infrastructure company, and maybe it was a charge point operator, made a lot of fanfare about putting EV chargers in a particular location. And within about a week or so, or 2 weeks of them putting this equipment in, the adjoining property owner put up a fence. And when the adjoining property owner put up the fence, you almost know what happened, right? There was no way to get into where the chargers were located anymore because they cut off the access. Charging company or everybody else started going crazy. Oh my God, how can they do this? This is we have. Okay. Long story short, they didn't bother to do title. They didn't bother to do a survey. And had they done that, they would have discovered that this location that they had picked, and for which it took them months to get zoning and permitting. Now, by the way, you have to ask the question, how did the zoning and permitting people not catch this? I don't know that part of the story. I wasn't directly involved in this. I only heard about this after the fact, but clearly somebody made a mistake. And they were completely landlocked. So even though in the past, people have been able to access this property, once the adjoining property owner put up their fence, there was no way to get there. And of course, they were furious. But there was literally nothing that they could do because they had they taken the time to spend a little bit of money, and it costs money to get a title search and it costs money to get a survey done, they would have discovered that the location that they picked was legally landlocked, which meant one of two things. Either they would have to have gotten some kind of an agreement with the adjoining property owner to be able to cross the property with an easement for access, which probably would have cost them a little bit of money. They probably would have had to pay for that too. Or they could have decided this was not a good place to put the equipment and maybe go across the street where you don't have that issue. But they were really out of luck. And all because they didn't want to spend a little bit of money up front to avoid the mess afterwards. Yeah, so this stuff comes up constantly.
Yeah. So there's 101 different variables. It's a very complex process. I'm presuming engaging with someone like yourself, you can ease through the complexity and smooth out because of your experience and knowledge of doing this process.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen, and I know the horror stories.
Yeah.
It's always a lot more difficult and a lot more expensive to extract yourself out of this after the fact.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the startup clients that I was working with knew none of this. And it took a little bit of time for me to convince them that the appropriate way to do this is that, okay, this is great that you're now putting your equipment here, but here's what you're going to need to do. You're going to have to order a title search. We're going to have to get a survey done. We need to be able to have somebody map out precisely where the equipment is going in conjunction with what comes up in the title report so we can see where everything is and we can make sure that your equipment's going in the right place. And so, of course, what did they ask? Because they're a scrappy startup. How much is that going to cost? I said, okay, here's how much it's going to cost. And I explained to them, they go, oh, that's a lot of money. We don't know if we want to spend that. I said, okay, well, let me put this to you another way. You don't do any of this. I told them the story about the company that was landlocked. I said, do you want to find out that you're landlocked or that you put it in the wrong place or that you don't have the right to put it here? This is one of your first deployments. You've staked your whole business model on the success of this equipment going in this place. And if you put it in the wrong spot where it doesn't belong, you're gonna not only are you gonna have the problem of what to do with the equipment that went in the wrong spot, you're gonna blow up your whole business.
Yeah.
Like, is it like? And then when I explained it to them that way, they're like, "Okay, you're right, we'll do it," and they did. And so, thank God they listened to me. But this was something that it never occurred to them. They just assumed, oh, well, okay, the owner will tell us that we can put it down here and we'll do it. I'll tell you even another twist on the same story. Somebody also came with one of these things and they said, okay, well, we got a term sheet with the owner to put the equipment down. I said, okay, great. I said, send me the thing. Let me take a look at it. And so I see the property address. I see the name of the owner. Let's just call it the ABC Corporation. And I look at it and I look up the ABC Corporation, and there's no ABC Corporation anywhere in that state. They're just not there. I said, okay, well, maybe that's how they're commonly known. Maybe the property is owned by somebody else. And we did a little bit of digging and we discovered that the property is actually owned by somewhere else. But if you look on the front of the building, it says ABC Company or whatever it is. That's, I guess, how they're commonly known. It's a business name, whatever it is, but it's not how the property is actually owned. So I
Yeah.
explained to them, I said, well, this term sheet's great. I said, I'm just telling you, when it comes time to actually send them a contract to deploy the equipment, we can't make it with ABC. You have to make it with XYZ. We need to make sure that XYZ has the authority to enter into, like, they couldn't believe it. Like the thought didn't even occur to them that like things like this actually happen. So, especially with newer businesses and especially with, I want to say with younger founders, this is, nothing against younger people. You and I are both a little bit older than some of them, but like it doesn't even, right? I know you're laughing, but like like stuff like
And
this, like just doesn't
yeah,
occur to them. Like these
yeah,
might be things they need to be thinking about.
yeah,
So you definitely need to talk to somebody that can guide you through this and explain, hey, this stuff actually does matter. Because when somebody comes to you and says, you put your equipment down on my property and you discover you don't have a contract with them or you put it in the wrong spot, you have a nightmare on your hands.
yeah.
And if you do a little bit of homework at the beginning, you can totally avoid it.
What do you think the challenges are here? Is it all about education? You've got to educate every party that's involved with this process.
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. There's definitely a certain level of education that's required. I made fun a little bit of younger people, but I was at a conference not too long ago, and when I started explaining to one of the vendors there what I do, he literally said to me, "Well, if I get into this mess, you can get me out of it." I said,
Mm,
"Yeah, I mean, I can try." I
yeah,
said, "But wouldn't you rather not get into a mess like that to begin with?" And you're like, "Yeah." I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, that's where I come in."
yeah.
I
Come in
said,
right from the
I
beginning.
right, you come in right from the beginning so that we
Yeah,
make sure that you're doing your stuff correctly from the get-go. So there's definitely a certain level of education. Some clients really don't care about the education. They just want to come to you and say, I don't care. You make sure that, my what's covered and you go with it. And others, they're like, well, what do I need that for? What do I have to spend money? Like, why should I spend money? That kind of thing. So with some of those clients, there's definitely a certain level of education that goes into that. And in terms of a lot of what I've been doing online, and in terms of the webinars or the CLEs or the articles and things like that, or even the podcasts that I've been doing, I really have been trying to educate people,
yeah.
and to get them to understand that like this can be done, but you also have to do it properly, and you need to
Yeah.
work with somebody that
Yeah.
understands how to do it the right way.
Can I ask you, do you know what the volume of EV charging points are in the US currently?
Yeah, you know what? I don't have that number literally off the top of my head,
No,
but
no, I
there is
just wanted
something.
to, is
Yeah,
there like a,
so there is something that that I can send to you, which would be great because maybe that might be something you can put maybe into the show notes
yeah,
or
yeah,
something like that. So they're the numbers are definitely they're going up tremendously.
yeah,
There's a greater and greater, and I know this for a fact, there is a greater and greater percentage of people here in the US that are now within very short distances or medium distances of publicly available EV charging, more
right,
so than ever before. There's something like, I think, close to 1.5 million, I think, EVs plus that are already on the roads. That number is growing constantly.
yeah,
Some of the companies, they've slowed down a little bit in terms of, the numbers of cars that they're producing, but others can't sell them fast enough. So it really all depends who it is. And the other thing that's also really starting to improve is that it's really very interesting too, is that in some states, there are way more EV chargers per vehicle than there are in others. And they're not exactly the places that you would think that they would be. And in other places, it's completely the other way around.
right,
And so like every state and every locality is a little bit different. Where you're seeing most of it is primarily along the coasts, seeing a ton of it in California, obviously. There's a ton of it in New York. There's a lot more of it now, like in Florida. there are places where it's really expanding exponentially. But the other thing that's also really starting to happen, and where that's starting to have an impact on it, is that battery technology is improving. You're starting to get to the point where there's more standardization. So it's easier from cars from different companies to be able to charge up at other locations. The connectors are starting to become standardized.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a whole movement now to even eliminate the connectors and to go wireless.
Right.
Um, Tesla's been working on that. Their robotaxi is set up to go wireless. Very interestingly, their Cybertruck already has the equipment in it to charge wirelessly, even though wireless charging is not really ubiquitous. It's just getting started,
Mm-hmm.
here in the US. And the other thing that's also starting to happen is that because range is improving, um, more people are charging up at home, and they have normal range, normal distance that they can go. So for the vast majority of people with EVs, they plug in at home, they plug in at work. For people who live in urban neighborhoods or in multifamilies, it's not so simple, but they're basically able to go wherever they need to go without having to worry about it. It's, when you have to take longer trips, that involves a little bit more planning and so on
Yeah.
and so forth. And that's where you can sometimes run into issues with not having enough charging available. But you're hearing fewer and fewer stories of the equipment not working, and more stories of people being able to say, "Hey, I was able to take this really long trip with just a little bit of advanced planning. It worked out just fine."
Yeah.
So the numbers are definitely improving, but there's still a lot of room to grow. Sorry, I wish I had the numbers. I would have looked it up
No, no,
beforehand, but yeah.
it, we can all get the feel that this it's a growing volume and it's
Oh,
getting better and
100%.
better. The reason why I asked that is, are you becoming in a position where you are understanding all the different variables of issues that are going to come up, or is it one day there's going to be this thing that's going to hit you and you think, wow, I never ever thought that was going to happen? Is that likely
Um,
to happen?
I don't I I don't think so. I think so far a lot of what I have seen in terms of problems, it's all stuff that I've seen in the other worlds of infrastructure, especially in the telecom industry. So for
Right.
example, like,
So it's
you know,
scalable.
20, yeah, like 20 plus years ago, like a lot of the cell phone companies weren't paying so careful attention to who their parties were. They were being a little bit sloppy with surveys and with title, and then they got into a couple of really big messes and real serious problems and putting stuff in the wrong place and not,
Yeah.
and so they realized those mistakes. And then now, if you were to develop a tower and not do those things, you would be out of a job. Like, it would be unheard of. Like, no one's not going to do that. Yet in the EV space, like, I hear about stuff like that all the time where they're not doing it. Or like one of the craziest things that I heard of is somebody told me that they have heard of companies. I'm not saying who they are, but of companies that are using open payment systems, like not even encrypting their connections. And I said to him, "That's the most insane thing that I have ever heard of." He goes, "No, there are some companies that are doing that." I said, "What kind? Like, who does that?" Okay. They're probably smaller companies. My guess is those companies are not going to be around for much longer, because all it takes is one really bad thing and to wipe everybody out and to wipe your customers out, and you're done. You're
Mhm.
done. All because, either they don't know that they need to be doing this, or they're so strapped for money that they didn't want to spend it, or even if they had the money, they didn't think it was something that they needed to pay attention to. So I think what's going to happen is that it's going to sort itself out. The companies that are really doing this the right way and thinking about this the right way, regardless of the type of infrastructure that they're putting in, whether it's EV charging or solar or wind or whatever the case may be, if they're doing this the right way, they're going to make it. The companies that are like skipping this stuff and not paying attention to it, they're just not going to make it, because they don't have a solid business foundation. They don't have a solid business model. And you know what? If they put in equipment in some of the wrong places and don't do their due diligence, you can have, I don't know, a lawsuit or two or three that can just totally wipe you out as a business,
Mhm.
and then you're done.
So, Jason,
Um,
who's your clients here? Is it the end user or the charge point operators? or
So
where do you fit
it's
in?
so I'll tell you where I fit in. It's actually a little bit of both.
Right.
It, it's not the end user in terms of the driver of the
No,
car.
no, not a person plugging in, the actual organization that says we're going to have
Correct.
this in front of our building.
Correct. So it's the organization that's putting the equipment down on their property, whether they're doing, solar on the roof, or they're doing EV chargers in the ground, or if they have, a cell site on their property, like those, or wind turbines out in the middle of nowhere, whatever it is. Those are the people. So the people that own the property are the clients. But at the same time, I also have clients that are putting this stuff out. So I don't know if I mentioned this before we were recording, but I'm working with somebody right now that is planning to manufacture EV chargers.
Right.
So they're right now in the process of leasing a facility, to do that. Another one that's doing urban-based charging, so they're doing that. Another one that's trying to build out a network.
Right.
So it's not only the people that own the property. Yes, I have those as clients, but I also have the people looking to put the stuff down somewhere, and those people are becoming my clients also.
Yeah. And what about from the energy suppliers? Do you ever come in from them side? Because there's obviously connections to be made, so you need to be.
Right.
Do they often come to you to help with legalities?
Yeah. So the way everything is done here, you're primarily dealing with very large scale power companies, and then also municipalities, that may own their own power, very large power companies.
Yeah.
Those companies are generally not coming to me because, again, they are frequently working with the companies that are deploying the equipment, and they're working with their engineering teams to get the interconnections done. And so it's all kind of coming from that side. And I'm kind of removed from that in terms of the stuff that I'm doing. Yes, they have attorneys that work at the power companies and things like that. And so they're working with the charge point companies on that side. I'm kind of coming at this from the other perspective in terms of dealing with either the charge point companies that are now in the middle,
Yeah.
because they're working now with a property owner, and even though someone on the other side is dealing with the power companies, or I'm coming at this completely from the other direction, primarily with the property owner who's now working with a charge point company. Now, a lot of companies that do this also do it on a turnkey basis. So they may come to somebody and say, we'll take care of everything.
Yeah.
And when they take care of everything, literally do take care of everything, I would be in there to deal with the contracts and the due diligence and to make sure that everything is going where it's supposed to be going. But they'll have that. And then you also have some of these companies that will do it piecemeal. I haven't gotten so many clients that are doing it piecemeal for two, I would say two main reasons. One, it's very difficult to manage your own project and to do all the pieces yourself. If
Mhm.
that's not your main business, it's really not what you're good at. It's incredibly time consuming. And then you've got so many different contracts and things that like you have to now manage in addition to doing what you do best, which is maybe just running a shopping center,
Yeah.
that it's not really ideal for you to get involved on that level. It's best to work with a turnkey company that's going to handle all of that. But then I would come in as the attorney to, review all the paperwork and the documentation and the diligence to make sure everything is going the way it's supposed to.
Yeah. And so let's have a scenario here. So I'm an
Mm-hmm.
organization. I'm thinking about having all my buildings have charging points in front of them. Where do we start? Obviously, we're going to
Mm-hmm.
engage with suppliers. If a supplier of the charge point operator, if he comes to me, he says, right, full turnkey, brilliant. I can sit back and relax. But
Mm-hmm.
obviously, I would still need to do some due diligence on that legal side and make sure he's doing the right thing, because it could be biased, couldn't it?
Oh,
It need to
100%. Yeah.
be, maybe in that
Yeah, but
case, I may need an independent person like yourself just to
mm-hmm.
come in and just overview what they're doing for us.
Yes. So
Is
one of the things,
can we
yeah,
sort of go through some scenarios and
sure.
the starting
Absolutely.
point, because that's key for our listeners today.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually an excellent question. So there are so many charge point companies and so many different business models and people that are doing this, and so many people that have gotten into this business thinking they're going to make a ton of money. So it's not outside the realm of possibilities that you may get somebody who's an awesome salesman, makes a great pitch,
Yeah.
and somebody says, "Oh my God, this is the best thing ever," right? So I would come in a couple of different uh, looking at this from a couple of different ways. One, I want to see the paperwork that they're giving you. I want to see what they're promising you. I want to see what's in there. I want to see what the terms are in a contract like that. Who's responsible for what? What exactly are they going to be doing? What are your responsibilities? What are their responsibilities? Um, are they incentivized to be accountable? Are they disincentivized from being unaccountable? Or are they disincentivized from being accountable? Or are they incentivized to be unaccountable? Right? Either way, you want to make sure that everybody clearly knows what everybody's responsibilities are. The
Yeah.
other thing is that even though you, as a property owner, may say, "Yeah, this is the greatest thing. I got to have EV charging. I must put it in here." You actually have to do a little bit of your own due diligence and to see whether or not it even makes sense to even embark on something like that to begin with.
Mm,
Don't
mm,
necessarily rely on the sales pitch that's coming from one of these companies. Look into it a little bit on your own and figure it out. And so, thankfully, there are a lot of resources that are available out there where you can actually look this stuff up. There are a bunch of companies that do this kind of thing where they can tell you pretty quickly if you put in, let's say, for example, a particular address right, in a particular location, you can get the equivalent of like a Google map, but specified for the world of EV charging. It will show you where all the EV chargers are in the vicinity of where you're located,
yeah.
who owns them, who the power companies are, what type of equipment is where. You may think, well, I have an ideal location right over here, but you might discover, unbeknownst to you, that down the block and one street over to the left, somebody has already got a project going where they're putting everything in. Well,
Mm,
okay, well, now who's stopping at your place if they're there?
yeah.
If what they're charging at the place down the block is cheaper, it's a nicer location, it's well lit, it's inviting, people are coming there. Like, why is anyone going to come to you? They don't need to do that, right? By you putting that in there, you're going to be cannibalizing business from there. Well, maybe to get some more business for yourself, but now you're going to be cannibalizing both of you. Where
Mm,
now you're not. So you have to start to do some of that due diligence on your own just to see if it makes sense.
mm,
It's worthwhile reaching out to your local power company and say, "Hey, I'm thinking of doing this. If I want to do this, will there be sufficient power available?
mm,
If there isn't sufficient power available, are there technological pieces of equipment or software that
mm,
I could put in as part of a project like this where I kind of get around that mess?"
yeah.
Or you may discover just the opposite. Yeah, I'm a genius. Because look, the closest EV charger is 5 miles away from here. Nobody else is in here. I'm on along a major roadway. I'm right off the highway. There's nothing along. This is perfect. People will come to me. And so it makes sense to do that. So you really have to go and do your own due diligence just to see if it even, before you even dive into, all the details, just to see if it even makes sense to put it where you think it needs to go.
Yeah.
I mean, just because you put it down somewhere does not necessarily automatically equate to people will come here and charge up. I mean, I know of an example of a property that of a place, I believe it's in Colorado, where they put in a beautiful EV charging station. I mean, it looks like a gas station with EV chargers. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
along the highway. It's everything. Okay, it's empty. So, one of my connections on LinkedIn put up something about this. Maybe it's not Colorado, but doesn't matter. It's somewhere here in the States,
Yeah.
and it's beautiful, but it's empty. No
So
one
what?
goes there.
It's what we
Why
call a
does no one
white
go
elephant.
there?
Yeah.
Because the rate that they are charging per kilowatt is so much more expensive than what another location is charging 5, 6 blocks down the road.
Yeah.
And
So
so no
where's
one,
people
as
going to
beautiful,
go?
no
Yeah.
one's going there because you're charging double or triple what they're charging down the road.
Mm,
So no one's coming to you. Now, they probably invested hundreds of thousands, if not maybe millions of dollars in building this facility, but they didn't do some basic due diligence, which means they didn't understand their market. They didn't understand what the market will bear in terms of what the prices that they need to charge. I am sure that if they would charge less money, they'll probably get a lot more people coming, but maybe they can't charge less money because they need to make sure that their, return on their investment is such.
yeah.
And in order for that to work, they have to be over here. Well,
Mm,
maybe you invested too much money in some fancy stuff you didn't need. So you could have lowered that and been more competitive. Like, it's still a business. You still have to look at it like it's a business. And you have to come at it from that perspective. So there's a ton of due diligence that you need to do before embarking on a project like that.
Jason, I think this is a subject for many, many podcasts. I think we could
I
do a
told you
whole
there's so many
series.
layers to the onion, Paul,
It
right?
is. There is so many
Yeah.
layers, and you've done very well today to sort of capture the overall of it. One last
Hmm.
question. I'm going to ask you about the detail of this. Your knowledge, is it
Hmm.
can we transfer it globally? Is this like, for instance, could you advise people in the UK or in various different countries?
Yeah, so I would say yes, but with a caveat. So I'm
Yeah,
obviously not licensed as a solicitor in the
yeah,
UK, but as an attorney, I get it.
yeah,
I
yeah,
understand the basics of due diligence, of looking at contracts, of incentivizing accountability, helping people figure out this from a business perspective.
yeah,
I worked for um, I worked for both AT&T and T-Mobile, right, on the real estate side, but there's a very heavy business component there. Like those companies don't make investments in
yeah,
building cell sites and things like that unless it actually makes business sense. You have to have a business head for this too, and understand some of that. And like you can't look at this stuff with blinders on. Like to the point that I made earlier about like you still have to do some basic due diligence to make sure if a project like this makes
yeah.
some basic business sense. So the answer is yes. Over the last couple of weeks, interestingly, I've had more people reach out to me from India and actually the UK, several people from the UK that I've spoken with over the last couple of weeks.
Right.
So yeah, I can do that, and I can certainly advise on that, and I can
Yeah,
certainly look at contracts and tell you, hey, this is what I think.
yeah,
What the rules and the laws might be in the UK, that I don't know.
yeah.
And
But
for
you can be
that,
classed as an
obviously,
advisor, can't you? In the
a
UK
hundred
and in
percent,
India, you can be an advisor. You're obviously not you're an attorney in the US, but an
right?
advisor to that. So
Yeah,
I
I
think for me that would work.
thank
If
you.
I had organisations that were working with me and they were stumbling with this process,
Yeah,
you would be a good go-to regarding some advice, which I
yeah,
think
oh,
would be
100%.
perfect. And that's
Because
one of
the issues,
the key things I wanted you on here,
thank you.
to just put it out there that there is advice available. And
Yes,
we need advice. This is another thing I wanted to get the message out. We need that
right.
advice, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and the kind of stuff that I do, it's very much applicable wherever you're undertaking projects like this. It's not, necessarily specific here to the US. Yes, where there be specific rules and laws and regulations and things like that that would come into play, 100%. But in terms of figuring out, the basics of this, does the project make sense? Like, what are the things we need in a contract? What are the things that we need to be looking at? Like all of that stuff, it's applicable regardless of where you're doing this. And by the way, it works whether we're talking about EV charging or solar equipment or wind turbines or data. Like it's in that respect, it's kind of all the same
Yeah,
because the way that you're looking at the contracts, the way that you're doing the due diligence, the way that you're approaching it from a business perspective, it's all pretty much the same kind of thing.
yeah. Brilliant. Well, Jason, thank you very much. But it's come to that time where I
Yes,
put my
I know.
oh,
We have so much more to talk about, though. Yeah, we'll
it's
do
come to
that
that
another
time where
time.
I'm going to put you on the spot now, and you've been
Okay.
very good
Oh
today.
no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
So, is there anything you can give back to the audience today as a takeaway from
Yeah.
today's interview?
Yeah. What I would say is that, especially here in the US right now, I think what I was coming up against over the last couple of months is that where people were very reluctant to make some additional investments and to take some additional risks with getting some more of these projects going. And I think right now that thankfully we are past the election. I think there's really an amazing opportunity here right now for people to kind of like step out of their comfort zones a little bit and to really go for it.
Yeah.
There's a tremendous need for this kind of infrastructure publicly available in the U.S. If it's done smartly, it will really have an enormous impact on the number of people that will be making this kind of a switch. I think there's tremendous opportunity here. I think up until now, people have been, afraid to do this. And what I would say to people is like, don't be afraid. There's enormous opportunity here, and I think, now's the time is probably as good as any, to really go for it. And I think the health of the EV ecosystem here, I really feel that it transcends politics. We're past the point right now where this is just like a fringe part of the automotive landscape, especially in the world of EVs. And I think especially also as it comes into the world of infrastructure, it's becoming more and more common, more and more popular. I think there are more and more opportunities, and just it can be done. You can make money from it. It can make sense. You just have to do it in a proper way. And I think that's really the main message: is get some education, learn how to do it, and make sure you're doing it right. Don't, what's the expression? Don't be penny wise and pound foolish.
Yeah. Engage the expert in the right
Engage the
place.
experts and do it right from day one.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, Jason, thank you very much. That is very sound advice. And I
Thank you.
can only expect that from someone in your position, being an attorney. I'm going to have to watch what I say all the way through this. I'm thinking, oh, I better say the right thing all the way through.
It's okay. No, you've been good. You've been good.
Well, look, thank you very much, Jason. It's been a real honor and privilege. We will invite you back again.
Thank you so much.
Our door's always open for you to come on and talk about this. Anything new comes up, you're more than welcome. So please, thank you, and you and your family stay safe in these times.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to my guest for joining me on Energy Speaks Back. I hope you found today's insights valuable. And don't forget, please, listen to the previous episodes because they're full of insights to help you make a real impact on energy efficiency. Together we can drive change and make a difference to the environment and our planet. So thank you. Once again, that leaves me with one more thing to say. Please, you and your family, stay safe in these times.